Welcome to episode 12 of Smitty's Endurance Podcast. I'm your host, Dave Smith. I'd like to welcome onto the show today Butch Stockton. Butch is from Higgins Lake, Michigan, and is one of the all-time greats. He has won many races throughout his career, but probably the most notable are his 5 AuSable River Canoe Marathon victories from 1982 to 1986. From what I understand, Butch was also a very good cross-country ski racer. Butch, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, glad to be here.
Yeah. Like
At
I mentioned to you when we were just talking there briefly, seems like a lot of people I've talked to in the paddling world, when I ask them who I should try to get on here, they mentioned your name.
I guess that's good.
Yeah.
Must have touched a few people out there anyway, so
certainly.
Happy about that.
Yes, absolutely. So Butch, if you would, maybe give us a little rundown, tell us about where you live. If that's different from where you grew up, maybe talk about that a bit. And then what you did for work, and then maybe a bit about your family and your upbringing.
Well, I still live in the same house I came home to when I was born in Grayling.
Oh, wow.
Been here for most of my 72 years, but was away to college for 4 years and worked in Mayo and Rose City area and was living over there for a year or so. But that's kind of when I was just starting to paddle too. So that worked out pretty well, except I didn't have anyone to train with over there. And just grew up with 2 older brothers that were real athletic and liked to hunt and fish. And so I kind of got into the athletic part, and I do some fishing, and the hunting's kind of faded out now that my brother's on around, but kind of wanted to outdo them, I guess, and played football, basketball, ran track, and those kind of things. But had a bad knee injury in high school and kind of suffered with it for 2 years. And then before I graduated, I had it fixed and went off to college. And when I got out of college, I was interested in getting into something athletic that wouldn't involve running because of my knee. When I would run, it would swell pretty bad, and had that for 20 years. Actually had torn cartilage in it that they didn't remove it. Day I graduated from college, got my draft deferment, so I knew I wasn't going to Vietnam on that day. And we went to Grayling, my girlfriend and I, who is now my wife, and I went to my brother's house for something to do. And he said, "We're going to watch the marathon." And lo and behold, we made it all the way to Camp 10 watching. And I think my oldest brother and I were still able to function. Everybody else was passed out in the car. And so we made it home after that and then drove over to watch the finish. And I was just totally captivated watching these guys paddle for the whole night, and was so impressed with Jerry Kellogg and Jeff Coca that thought I have to try that. Got to the finish, and lo and behold, the third place team that ran third all night, Buzzy and Stevie Peterson, ended up winning, and Jerry and Jack were second. And I think, Al Camp and Bob Zavril from New York ran second all night, and I think they dropped out below foot sight. So I was hooked. And the next year, my oldest brother Wayne and I paddled it, and we made it to Parmalee. And all I remember about that race is my wife dragging me up the hill at Parmalee Campground. And I thought, got to do better than this. Yeah. So it just kind of built from there, and that's how we got started. So wow. I've always been involved with athletics and coaching and reffing basketball, always on the move, and finally had both knees replaced within one 12 years ago and the other one 9, and still active, like to bike, and trying to get back into paddling a little bit this summer. So okay. Hopefully.
Awesome. So Butch, there was a time period there where it seemed like, pretty much any race that you entered, um, you were winning or certainly right towards the top. How do you feel you were able to do that? Can you, is there one reason or probably multiple reasons?
Yeah, I think mostly it had to do with the people that I hooked up with to paddle. And that made all the difference in the world. And, one guy in particular that I'll remember and watched him in the first marathon, his name is Bob Welsh, still a very good friend. And we watched the start of the race, and it used to start in front of the courthouse in Grayling. And they ran down Michigan Avenue, turned right, and ran all the way down to Ray's where they put in. And Bob fell in the street in front of Spike's. Canoe crashed down on him on the pavement, and he was bleeding and passed out a couple of times after they got in the canoe, but lo and behold, he finished the race. And I ended up paddling the marathon with him several times and twice with Al Robinson, who Bob paddled with in that first race that I watched. And you got to know Bob to really understand how he thinks. He had a paddling tank in his basement in Southgate. And on rainy days, that's where he paddled, in the basement. And he was a stickler. And getting hooked up with him taught me that there's nothing in the canoe that you shouldn't try, short of standing up. And we tried different strokes, different paddle lengths, all kinds of balance things. And he just turned me on to figuring out, why won't this canoe go in this depth of water? Why will it go there? And why is everybody that grows up in Grayling fast in shallow water, but when we get to deep water, we're not fast? So, just got me to thinking about different things. And my family was into it, and I had good support and good health for quite a few years. And being a school teacher in Grayling for 30 years, I had the time to where I could train in the summer. And so it just, I don't know, it worked out.
Yeah. So Butch, do you have a favorite event that you've raced over the years? Would it be the marathon, or is there a different one possibly?
Well, to be honest, I never really liked the marathon. And it was the opposite of everything we do in canoe racing. Most of our races start in the morning, and you paddle in the daytime, and they're shorter. But the marathon's the opposite. You start in the dark and you paddle all night in the dark. And back when I started, we actually started at 10 o'clock, and we didn't have daylight savings time. So when you went under the back bridge in Grayling and past Penrod's, it was just like going into a cave, because there was no light. Wow. And the whole night, by the time we got down to McMaster's, it was just about as dark as you can imagine. And so that was a little bit different, but just things just worked out for me. I think I just got hooked up with the right people and was inquisitive enough, and just worked at it. And I always just felt that if you're going to put in the time, you should improve. And if you don't, you're doing something wrong. Maybe you should take up bicycling or something different. Yeah. So
now, was I correct in that opening there? Did you do some cross-country ski racing as well?
Yes, actually bought a pair of skis from Jeff Kellogg, and they're old wooden skis, and we started skiing, and quite a few of us did. Big John Baker and I and Bob Welch and a few of the other guys too. And we found that it was a really good cross training for paddling. And we found out that through the paddling, we were pretty fast on skis, double poling. And I had skied downhill for a few years when I was growing up. So I kind of adapted to the cross-country stuff pretty quick. And with the upper body strength and endurance that the paddlers developed, I could win a lot of races.
Yeah.
So it was kind of fun. The guys that skied all year long and didn't paddle were mad at all of us.
Yeah.
When Bruce Barton and I would show up at a race, everybody would just kind of groan. And eventually through the years with the development of the skating technique, that's kind of taken the emphasis off your upper body so much. So it's equaled out now.
Sure.
Yeah. But I love that sport.
Yeah. No, likewise. Yeah. It's for any endurance sport, it's I think it's there's not a muscle you're not using when you're cross country skiing. So it's great exercise.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. One thing that I do remember, and somewhere along the line, we tore a canoe in half. My brother Bob and I did down, I don't know if you were the end of Connors Flats is, and there's
Yeah.
a cut there we always called the Big Indian.
Yep.
Well, we went in there in the middle of the winter and we had a brand new canoe we bought from John Buckley, and actually was built by Stanley Hall in Oscoda. It was the first time my brother and I paddled it. So we went in there, and of course, seat broke, wrapped the canoe around a tree and ripped it in half.
Oh.
And not knowing where we were on the river, instead of walking down to McMaster's, which would have been about a 1.5 mile walk, we walked all the way back to Stefan's in snow up to our knees. And
Oh, wow.
so we decided at that point, maybe this paddling in the winter was not what to do. So after that, we just made plans to change any technique changes we wanted to do. We skied hard all winter and didn't touch the canoe. Weight trained and we ran and skied. And then in the spring, when we got in the canoe, we had a definite plan of what we wanted to correct. And we kind of got the feeling that, all our bad habits, if we paddled all winter, all we did was reinforce them instead of giving our muscles a chance to rest and then retrain. So it's just something different.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. What now when you would do that, would you try to pick out like one or two main things? Like, because sometimes you get to the point where if you're trying to change too many things at one time, that can be kind of challenging. But would you just try to pick one or two technique things to work on, or?
Well, I think back to when we first started paddling, it was kind of I don't know how to explain it, but anyway, I went to Mount Laurier the one year and raced there, and I met a guy named Ron Williams from British Columbia, and we raced against them. And of course, I don't remember how we even finished, but or who I might have been with Jay Stefan Jr. But the following year, I happened to go down by Ray's canoe livery after school, and it was right around Labor Day, the week after Labor Day. And lo and behold, Ron Williams was there on his way back from Shawinigan to British Columbia. And I got talking to him, and we started talking about paddle strokes and stuff. And he said, the old guys paddle what we call like a wheel, a wheel rolling down the street. And he said, Corbins don't paddle that way. He said, they paddle in a circle, a flat circle. And he said, his partner, Bruce Hawkins, was his name, was probably the strongest guy I've ever seen as far as muscle development. And they decided they were going to change their stroke to paddle a fast stroke like Corbin. So he said, we decided we were going to paddle 75 strokes a minute all the time, no matter what we were doing. If we were getting a drink, if we were just talking or what, he said, we were never going to drop below 75 strokes a minute. And so talked to him for a couple hours, and then he headed west and I went home. And when we got into the winter, that was my focus, was I want to paddle a faster stroke. And I said, the guys, are riding a faster, lighter gear on bicycles. Why wouldn't that work with paddling? So we did. We worked on trying to get that circle and getting away from the wheel. And slowly but surely it came. And so we just said, after that, no more paddling in the winter. We're just gonna work on things to make ourselves be able to paddle faster. So we did like 3 to 5 minute intervals at 100 strokes a minute.
Wow.
My nephew Brett and I worked on that religiously. We didn't do the 90-second intervals. We didn't do the 60-second things, because I said, every sprint I've ever done in the canoe lasts at least 5 minutes. When you're trying to break a wake or you're trying to get away from somebody. And so then we decided that we were going to stretch it out to 15 to 20 minutes. So we would do, we do those 3 to 5 minute, 100 strokes a minute. Didn't care where we were going, if the canoe was moving or not. We were just trying to make that rate. So the next thing was we tried to do, and I got this idea from John Baker. John used to put in at Ray's and he would paddle to Rayburn's Bridge. And it's about 24 minutes or maybe less. So I started doing that. And we would put in there and we would just go as hard as we could till we got there. And then we would back off and we'd paddle on down to Wakely or McMaster's. And slowly we found out that, geez, this canoe will go a lot faster with what we're doing than what we were doing before. And we got a phone call coming. We knew that.
Okay.
But one day I got to paddle with Bob Zaverill. He was here for a week or so, and we paddled out on Higgins Lake. And he said, "You finally learned to circle, didn't you?" And I said, "Oh, yeah. And he said, "I've noticed." He says, "You guys all of a sudden caught on to that." And that was kind of a relief to hear that from somebody, because it kind of reinforced what I had kind of thought was what we should be trying to do. Plus the fact that if muscle guys were going to win all the races, Jeff and Jerry Kellogg and Buzzy and Stevie Peterson and Big John and all those guys, they would have been beating Corbin's hands down. But so I knew there had to be more to it. And Solomon kind of clued me in and said, it's not what you have to put on the paddle, it's how you apply it to the paddle. And I guess you kind of have to know Solomon to get the humor in that. But it made so much sense to me, because Solomon didn't look like he would be that strong, wiry kind of kid. But I tell you what, he knew where to put it on the paddle. And if I could have paddled 10 strokes a minute faster, we would have gone a lot faster than we did. So it's good.
I'd like to stop you right there if you don't mind. I reached out to a couple people, and Solomon was one of them, to ask them to share a story about you. You mind if I share that one from Solomon?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna read it off my phone here. So he says, well, thinking back, getting a call from Butch Stockton to paddle was very special for me, knowing that he was one of the best to paddle the marathon. He knew the river like no other, always in top shape. I felt safe and lucky to learn more about sport through his knowledge and athleticism. A few stories I remember: getting to the cuts before the first dam, him singing "I Wear My Sunglasses at Night" and hitting those cuts perfectly. And then he said the best part was meeting his family. He mentions Phyllis feeding you guys, Mike letting him stay in his room, and then Kristen being the one. He says that her dad maybe went to this concert where Butch learned that song. And then he said meeting his parents, and then not sure what the name is. I think he mistyped it. Someone taking him fishing.
That was my dad.
Okay.
Speed.
Yeah. Well, he
Yeah,
says speed, so I wondered because I said, well, that's not
yeah.
me, but yes, he said speed. And then he also said that he thinks you guys in 1984 were the last ones to win with wooden paddles.
That could be, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Because I think the next year we had Barton paddles.
Okay.
Brett and I did. I remember that. We didn't use them until we got, I think, to Alcona,
So those were,
daylight.
how much lighter were those paddles than what you were using?
You know, not, maybe a couple ounces. It wasn't drastic, but after using a wood paddle all night, anything lighter felt tremendous.
Yeah.
And that was something I always tried to do. I always paddled with at least a medium bladed paddle until we got to daylight. And then I switched down to an ultralight or whatever I could get that was light.
Yeah.
And that just picked you up at daylight. You needed something to think, God, it's going to get easier here.
Right.
But it's just psychological. Like Gene Jensen told me one day, he said, you know what? He said, in this sport, he said, if you think wearing purple pants makes you go faster, wear purple pants.
Okay.
And I always kind of took that to heart. But, I picked up things from Solomon, and it was kind of funny because we got in the canoe the first time we paddled, trying to think, we put in at McMaster's, and we paddled to Camp 10, like 3 hours, never been in the canoe before. And we got down into the bigger water below McMaster's, going to Parmalee, and we hit the corners just perfect. And I didn't have to say a word. He knew exactly where I wanted to go because that's the way he wanted to go. And when we got home, or my dad picked us up that night, he said, well, what do you think? And I said, Dad, we're fast. I said, first time in the boat. And I just knew then that Solomon and I were on the same page. He was so good that after the first corner, the way I would take the corners and cut across to the next one, he knew exactly what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And it just worked so good that I knew if, we paddled 2 more days after that, and it was just easy.
Yeah.
I think my brother Bob clocked us in Cook Pond at 78 strokes a minute going across the pond. And like I said, if I could have paddled 88, we'd have gone that much faster.
Yeah.
He just, some guys have a top end, some canoes have a top end. I think Solomon, his top end was higher than most people. And I think that proved out when he paddled with Serge. They're both good.
Yeah.
Real good.
So another person I talked to was John Sullivan, and John shared, just to your point, he said, he was, you were helping him a bit with some turning and how to turn properly and read the river. And he said the unique thing, other than you knew the river better than anybody, he said, there was a time where he went around a corner and kind of did it perfectly, but then you said, well, that one's good, but then that might not work out for the next 2 or something along those lines. So I think that's, as I'm starting out with my paddling, I've been at it for about 2 years now. I mean, that's just a huge part of it, is knowing what's ahead. And to that point, I think that's if you can get that down, that's a huge advantage.
It is. It really is. And, John, I love John because when he paddled, he was racing for first place. A lot of the guys go to the races and they're not looking that far ahead, but John was giving it all he had all the time. And that was always kind of my philosophy is if it's a 3-hour race, you better be ready to go hard 3 hours. And I know Alan Rudquist from Minnesota, he told me, he said, you didn't like to race me because of the fact, he says, you don't paddle the way we do. And I said, well, yeah, you guys like to go the first 15 minutes hard and then pack up and ride. And then you'll have a pack. And this happened to me and Brett at Schwenningen the first time we went. We ended up at the end with 6 other boats. We just goofed around most of the day. And we ended up 6th. Because all of a sudden, when everybody made their move and took off, we didn't know what was happening. And we ended up on the first day, we ended up 6th or 7th at the tail end of the pack. And I'd made that mistake in a few ski races too. I skied with people till we got to the end and then got a leg cramp and finished 2nd. And I said, that's not going to happen again. If you can stay with us, then fine, you got a chance to beat us. But if you can't, then you're not going to be there at the end. And that's kind of the attitude that John had too. And I always told Alan, I said, just come to the marathon and races. If you're faster than we are and you say you are, well, then come and race us. And he's he just kind of stuttered about that. But Alan's a good guy. The big races, that's how they race at Schwenningen and New York too. Sometimes, they'll stay in a pack and you can either end up real well at the end or you can end up real bad. Yeah. You never know what to expect. But fewer people there are, the better you're going to do.
Yeah. Who are maybe some of the other, paddlers that you've learned from over the years?
Well, I learned a lot from Bob Welch and I learned a lot from Sullivan and paddled with Jack Coca a lot when I was first getting started. And Jack, I got a lot of respect for that man. He's probably one of the toughest guys that, of course, his son, Jeff Coca, kind of fell off the same tree with his dad. So he is a tough guy too. But you learn sometimes with people, you learn things that will work with that person, but won't work with the next person you paddle with. So what I kind of think I've learned something from just about everybody that I've paddled with. Everett Crozier had kind of a real quick stroke with a little catch in it that shoved the canoe away from the side he was on. And I had a heck of a time catching on to that, but I finally figured it out. And, we worked at it. And Everett taught me about paddle length, about controlling your stroke rate with the length of your paddle. And I think in today's world, a lot of the younger guys have gone to real short 47, 48-inch paddles, and they get a faster stroke, but their times aren't getting any faster. And if you look at guys like, take Stevie Peterson, for example, and Jeff Kellogg, and those guys were super strong, but they could paddle a fast stroke with a big paddle. And so I'm thinking, you got all this strength, and a lot of the young guys are well built and they're in shape, but they're not really getting anything out of their short paddle. It's kind of like using a lever to lift a weight. Short lever, you just don't get the lift. So you go a little bit longer. And I think there's a lot to learn by paddling with more people. And the marathon, I always kind of complained because the marathon, the guys pair up beginning of the year. They sign a contract. It's like being married for the summer. And they don't paddle with anyone else. So once you paddle with somebody long enough and they've learned everything from you that you've got to teach, and you've learned everything from them, things aren't going to get any better until you paddle with somebody else. And that's what I found, is that if you paddle with different people, you learn how to adapt to their style, and how to shorten your stroke, how to maybe put your stroke out a little further in front of you to match up with that person. Lynn Whitty's a good example of that. Lynn and I trained a lot after I hurt my back and kind of gave up the marathon because I couldn't stay in the canoe after an hour and a half. And we got really fast. Yeah, some people complain that Lynn's always out of time. And I said, I paddled all summer with Lynn. We went to New York. We finished the first portage in 48th place out of 49 teams. We ended up 18th, won the mixed. And we had a bad portage. We got dumped right at the start and went swimming. But we were fast, and here I'm paddling with a woman who was 119 pounds, and we matched up. We could turn the boat. It was great. But I think just being able to paddle with a lot of different people is what determines how you're going to do with somebody. And it sounds kind of simple, but I had more fun after I quit doing the marathon, because then I could paddle with different people. And I got involved in the nationals. And that was probably, out of all the paddling races that I've gone to, I like the nationals, I think, the best. I enjoyed the race, 6-hour race we used to have over on the Manistee at Man. I loved that race because the river is completely different than the Ausable. But the nationals, 3 days of racing. It's in August. It's hot, and you paddle C1. You got mixed C2, men's C2, and 3 days in a row. And it's usually anywhere from an hour and a half to 220, something like that. Yeah. And so it's fun because everybody's there, in the canoe world, just about.
Right.
That was my favorite.
Yeah.
Trying to think, I kind of made a list of people, that I've paddled with over the years, but everybody I paddled with, I learned something. Yeah. And I'm sure, I hope they learned something from me, but who knows? Right. I think John did, because John got to where he was fast, and that really excited me with him. So worked good.
So Butch, I'd like to ask you a little bit, you mentioned it briefly, but, you guys went quite fast. I mean, really just about as fast as the guys go now, but yet the equipment you were in, wasn't, at least I don't think it was quite as advanced. So how do you think you guys were able to do that?
Well, I just think that we worked a little harder at it. Not to say that back then the guys were tougher or whatever, but the river was different. You might get to foot sight, for example, and you paddle 10 minutes or 15 minutes below foot dam, and you pass the water. So the sandbars that you usually cut across on all the big corners down there were bone dry. And so now all these dams are set on flow. And, I've paddled that stretch from Alcona to Loud the last couple of years in my C1 and in my big Sawyer Champ 1 that weighs about 80 pounds with one of my friends. And it's beautiful now. But when we were paddling the marathon, that was all big sucky corners. You had to run way to the outside. So you were working so hard. And if you cut the corners, it would just kill you. But now the river is more static. And I actually think that some of the areas like that Loud or Alcona to Loud stretch now, like in the Hassel boat, which is a great boat in that kind of water, I'd love to race the marathon one more time and be able to get the boat up. Because I think like Andy Trebold, those guys, he and Steve Lajoie, they could keep the boat up the whole way until they hit Loud Pond. I'm sure they could, because it's awesome water now. It's not that 4 feet stuff they were dragging the anchor in.
Sure. So Butch, what about what would you guys do? What would did you have like a typical week of training? Like, did a lot of your weeks mimic the same, or were you always mixing things up? I mean, it sounds like you guys put in quite a few hours.
Yeah, I everybody asked me about hours, and I've gone back through all my logs. I always wrote down everything I did. And the years that we were the fastest in the marathon, we didn't go to New York. We finally realized that going to New York, we were peaking too soon. And then when we got back, we just didn't want to paddle. So we quit going to New York. And I'm trying to think, we got away from paddling the Au Sable. And if we paddled on the Au Sable, we'd never put in above Wakely Bridge. And we knew that stretch, we'd paddle it so much, and everybody's fast and in shallow water anyway. So I figured out that most of the race is deep water. Mayo Pond, paddle a couple hours, you cross Elkona, paddle an hour and 20 or hour and 30, you're in Loud. Then you get in 5 Channels Pond. That's a half hour or 25 minutes of deep water. And then you get in a little bit of river and you're in Cook. And you portage that, and boom, not too long, you're right in Foot Pond. So we had to learn how to go in deep water. So we started paddling on Higgins Lake, and a typical week we do probably at least one day in the morning. Brett would come down and we'd grab the canoe and we'd run 6 blocks down to the beach, throw the boat in, and we paddle around the big end of Higgins Lake. And it was 2 hours. And we'd go just as hard as we could to what we call Point Detroit. And we'd get a drink and then just kind of paddle across to Flag Point. And then we'd start back and we'd just start winding it up. And we try to paddle as fast a stroke as we could still maintain in the second hour. And we'd get back to the beach and we'd jump out and we'd run with the boat as hard as we could up to the house. 2.5 hours, we were done. 10 o'clock in the morning. And once we started doing that, we figured out how to go fast in the deep water. And that made a big, big difference in everything. And that's why I tell the guys, you got to get out to where you don't have the current. And I said, I like to be tired from going fast. I don't like to be tired from dragging the boat around the corners up by Burton's Landing, where you're running into logs, jabbing your paddle, and you're not learning anything doing that. So,
yeah.
But that was kind of what we got into. And then we did a lot of upstream stuff, and then my later years, I started paddling at Burton's every night after school up to town or the expressway and back. And then I'd throw in a 18-minute from Rayburn's to Burton's, just as hard as I could go. Yeah, some nights it wasn't very hard because I'd be shot, but you kind of get into a pattern, and water becomes water. So, if you paddle the same place every night, not a big deal.
Yeah. How about any sort of other training? You said you guys did a little bit of running. Did you do some traditional strength training, some weightlifting, or?
Yeah, somewhat. I got into didn't do a lot of weight training. We did a lot of running, probably too much running in the beginning years because everybody was weight conscious. And until I finally ended up having a full checkup with a specialist and found out what my weight should be to keep my optimum strength, I quit worrying about trying to lose weight. So that and my knee was about shot. And so I was only running maybe once a week, about 3.5 miles on ski trail. And I'd run just as hard as I could go for 3.5 miles. And that was it. So I was still fast to be able, to run and carry the canoe, but it wasn't affecting my weight or my strength. And that's it. And then, the last few years I've been doing weight training, but I got into a real lightweight regimen and just tons of repetitions. And then when you're all done, then do burnouts with next to no weights. And I found that I was actually stronger doing that than the years that I tried to bench 310 pounds at the end of the weight training season.
Yeah.
That just made me slow.
Yeah. Huh.
Really did. So, but, the key, I think, is just you got to have a little fat. I always looked at some of the guys that paddle the marathon and realized that, once they've depleted what their stores are, they don't have anything to run off of. And I know that I had one marathon and really had a good chance to win that marathon, and had a little bout of diarrhea and vomiting. And I happened to be the chairman of the marathon that year and putting it all together. It all just kind of culminated with the race. But we still ended up, I think, third, battle with Bob Welch, but we had a good chance to win that race. And I feel bad about that. Anyway, nothing I can do about that now.
Yeah.
But
so, there's these long races, they're mentally taxing. Did you do anything special, like, from a mental standpoint to help you get through those long races? Maybe
yeah,
on that a little bit.
Yeah, that's something that people really don't give a lot of thought to. It doesn't matter if we just drove home from Alabama, and I'm driving for 14 hours nonstop. So you don't think about that in the canoe. You're going to be in that canoe for 14, 15. I think my first marathon took me 18 hours. And I finished, my partner had one arm that was working, but the things that your mind goes through in that race, and I've run a running marathon before, and it doesn't compare. You bonk, but in the marathon, you bonk, like Lynn says, 3 or 4 times. So your head's got to be in the game, and you have to be able to, just don't let your mind start thinking about quitting. Bob Welch always said, no matter how bad you feel, you're going to feel better. And the year that I was sick, when I paddled with Bob, I weighed myself before the race, and I weighed myself the night after the race, and I was still 12 pounds lighter. And I had eaten everything I could get my hands on that Sunday afternoon and that night, and still lost that much weight. So, luckily I had some fat to burn.
Yeah.
So that's what I was getting at. You have to be able to, when your body makes that switch from running on what you've got stored to burning fat, it's pretty hard to go back. So it's nice to have a little roll.
Fair enough.
And to run off of baby fat.
So Butch, when you guys were racing at the front there, especially in the marathon, were you in the same boat every year?
No, I think, trying to think, I know Brett and I raced first year we ran. Well, actually, the first boats I paddled in, I built myself, wood strippers, and they were pretty pretty fast. The latter ones that Bob Welch and I paddled with were pretty good and pretty similar to the Hassel boat. But Brett and I raced, the first year I raced a Kevlar. It was a first generation Corbin. It was crooked. You know, we got lost in Alcona Pond in the fog. Hadn't been for campers on the bank. We hollered and they came out and told us which way the dam was. But so then the next year we raced, I can't remember what boat. I think we might have raced the same Corbin, but the year I raced with Sal, I raced the second generation Corbin. And that was a fast boat, but nobody ever caught on to that canoe for some reason. We paddled a 1420, I think. Sal and I did in that canoe, and I'd only been in it 4 times. And then I think Brett and I might have paddled one of those the next year. It's a different boat, but it was the same design. And I can't remember what we raced the last year. It was a Kevlar boat, but I really don't even remember that. So they were changing boats fast. Then.
Have you been in one of the new Corbins? Is it quite a bit different?
Yes. And actually, I paddled with Lynn in one. Some of the first ones he came out with had rocker in them. The bottoms weren't flat from stem, from bow to stern. And I didn't like that. Lynn and I had a real hard time out in the lake paddling with other people. That it wouldn't climb. It would climb the wake, but it wouldn't go over it. So I didn't like that boat. And I did paddle one with a flatter bottom, and it was better. I liked the Gillies boat too. That was actually what Gillies did. He put trying to think, one end of that boat is the V1 and the other end is the Hassel boat. It's a combination. And I raced the V1, never raced it in the marathon. Raced it a couple races with Brett though, and with Lynn. Lynn and I were fast in it. Now Jimmy Harwood and I raced that, paddled a V1. We were actually faster in the V1A amateur boat that I had than we were in the V1 Pro. We just could not make that thing go. And I really had a problem with it with Brett because it was pretty V'd and he wouldn't pay attention. So the boat would lay on one side and my back would start hurting. So I'd say, Brett, what are you doing? Boom, it'd go flat. And then 20 minutes later, it'd be laying the other way. And I just never really got into that canoe. And the Hassel boat, we paddled the first Hassel, which didn't meet the specs for the 3 and 27 and continuous curve, but we filled it in and made it legal. And that boat was pretty fast, but whenever it took that, made a glass master off of it and filled it all in, that boat today, I think is, and even Serge told me the one year he borrowed one for the marathon when he paddled it with Brett. And he said, this is the best boat for the marathon because it will go, you can balance it out, no matter what you got for weight difference. And it'll go in the shallow water, it'll go in the suck water. And if it gets windy down in the ponds, it's a good boat for that. But a lot of people said, well, it's not as fast in the deep water. And I thought, I don't know, I think it is. I'm kind of biased.
Sure.
But
yeah, it's always interesting to talk about the boats, just throughout the history. Things have changed a bit, but yet some of those old boats were plenty fast.
Yeah, and you were asking Lynn, I watched that last night actually. Okay. And, kind of talking about what we could do to get more people involved in canoeing.
Yeah.
And Lynn could probably tell you what I'm going to say because I pushed it for a long time. I've always felt we need to put a weight limit, minimum weight limit on the canoes. Yeah, and they did this in the outrigger canoe racing in Hawaii. They made the outriggers 400 pounds minimum. And if it's lighter than that, you have to fiberglass lead in the bottom to get it up to 400 pounds. Okay. So everybody's paddling, but they're building them out of just fiberglass. Everett could have built one of those that would have weighed probably less than 100 pounds out of carbon and core, but they didn't do that. And when I raced there in 1988 and in 1990 in Oahu, we had 115 boats. And I think we need to put like a 45-pound weight limit on the boats, on the canoes. And if you do that, they don't have to be made out of carbon. They don't have to be made out of Kevlar. You can make them out of fiberglass or, just cheaper material. That way kids could get into it. Because and everybody be paddling the same weight boats. You could still have your different designs. That's not a problem. But, if the boat starts out, it's got to be 45 pounds. Why build it out of something that's going to cost you $5,000?
Sure. Yeah, no, I can see that as a limiter. I've participated in triathlons my whole adult life, and that sport too, with like the bicycles, for example. My wife's actually always said that. She said everyone should start the bike portion, and there should be limits like that, or everyone has the same bike, something cheaper, so more people can get into it.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I like that. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, I know it would hurt some people's businesses, but
yeah, that would.
When you just try and figure what's a canoe cost you now, a new Savage River, or Surge is still building boats, I'm not sure, and a minimum of 3 paddles. So that's a lot of money to try to swing your dad to buy for you so you can try canoe racing.
Right.
I just think we could do something along that line that would help.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, that's a new idea someone hasn't mentioned yet. So, hey, so one other thing I wanted to ask you about, because kind of to the same point about getting people into it, I know for a long time and maybe even still a little bit, but there were a lot of, younger kids in Grayling that got introduced to the sport in some capacity. But one other person I reached out to was Pete Mead. And I think you had Pete in class when you were teaching.
Yes.
And he mentioned, and I thought it'd be neat if you could talk a little about, he said you guys would go on I think it was an 8th grade canoe trip.
Yes.
But you probably had some of those guys that are, racing now. Did you have people, who else was in your class besides Pete? You must've had some of these guys.
Oh, geez. I had Jimmy Harwood, Matt Ashton, trying to think who else is paddling now, but Spencer Dorenzi. There's a lot. I know if you run down the list, there's a lot of them. Some of the kids coming up now were too young for me to have had in school, but the guys that paddled maybe 10 years ago, I had a lot of them in school. And we took all the boys overnight on the Manistee River, which was kind of a trip. I think at one year we had 90 boys, trying to get them all down the river.
Right.
But for a lot of those kids, it was the first and maybe the only time they were in a canoe in their whole life. So, I still run into kids places today, and they want to talk about that. Yeah,
no, that's a neat opportunity for sure.
Yeah.
What subject did you teach? Did you teach only one subject, or?
No, when I taught high school for a semester in Roscommon, and then I went back to school. Or actually, I got another job out of teaching, after a couple of years, I went back to school and I got hired in Grayling to teach after that. And, that was, God, that seems so long ago. It's hard for me to remember what it was like, but teaching gave me an opportunity to meet a lot of people and a lot of good people, and working on the canoe races too. I did a lot of organizational stuff, worked with Lynn a lot. She's probably one of the 3 or 4 people that I can recall with canoe racing that has done so much that most people don't realize it, but she has.
Well, yeah, even my partner Ben and I, just being newbies. I mean, we were probably bugging her, asking her all kinds of questions, but she was always willing to help us out, and we were super thankful for that. So she's just so giving of her time and her expertise to a lot of people.
She's good.
Yeah.
I never paddled with anybody that runs a canoe any better.
Awesome. Well, hey, Butch, that's about all I have. Is there anybody else that you'd like to mention, or anything else that you thought would be worthy of talking about?
I just think that the guys need to paddle with different people. They have to be willing. And I always remember talking to Buzzy Peterson. We were over in Minneapolis for a race. And what they used to do on Wednesday nights, they would all meet, and the bow guys, like, Buzzy Peterson, maybe Dan Hassel would show up, or Gene Jensen. And there were a lot of good paddlers, but they would throw names in a hat. And the new guys would get to pick out, and they would maybe get to paddle with Buzzy Peterson or with Gene Jensen, and or with Steve Peterson or Larry Peterson. A lot of people would show up, and they would race, just to pick up race on Wednesday night. And gosh, I remember guys like, I think Alan Rudquist came out of that. Stuart Bastian, who paddled for a few years, was super fast. Dave Sipe, we used to call him Goat Man, was a friend of Steve Peterson's. But these guys, they just wanted to paddle, and the top guys in the world of flat water canoeing paddled with them. And that's how they got started. Yeah. And I think people need that connection to cut the learning curve. There's a lot to learn in canoe racing, and my brother and I started out together, and he was older than me, so he knew more than me, but I was younger and actually knew I was smarter than my older brother. And after we tried our first marathon, we decided that neither one of us knew a dang thing, so it was probably best that we hooked up with somebody that knew more than we did, and that's how we got started. And that's what these guys need to do. They need to just kind of paddle with everybody. Have a night where they meet on the river or at the lake and just throw names, bowmen put their name in a hat and stern guys pick out. And that's who you go with. That will perpetuate the sport. And I think, that's what Jimmy Harwood and I used to do. That's how we got Mo Harwood and Matt Ashton started. We would paddle with them after school. We would switch off. And so that's kind of what you got to do.
I love that. Yeah, no, as someone, again, just kind of still starting out, I would love to be able to jump in the boat with a few of these guys who are finishing, towards the top. I think that'd be a lot of fun.
Yep, but the guys, as they get so spent on that marathon, they got to. I do have one thing I want to tell you, though. This is a story about Sullivan, just to get even. All right. First year we did the marathon together. he was always telling me that being half Indian, he could see in the dark. He said, I can see in the dark. And you've talked to Sullivan, you know how slow he's kind of got a drawl and drags it out. And so anyway, we get in the race and we're down below McMaster's and it's just dark. And of course, we're trying to catch my nephew Brett and his cousin Tony Short. They got about a 3-minute lead on us. And we're hammering along pretty good. No light. We didn't want anybody to know where we were at or anything. So we come around the corner. It's a kind of a high bank there, and this beaver leaps off, hits the water right by Solomon, splashes him. I thought we were going to tip over. Yeah. So we get things straightened out. We're going along, and he says, "Hey, you think you could turn on that light?" And I didn't say anything. A little bit later, "Hey, you think you could turn on that light?" And I said, "Solomon, you're an Indian. You can see in the dark. You don't need that light." So he said, "Okay." So we paddle about an hour. We're getting down close, and the river kind of gets narrow before you get to Parmalee. And it's dark again. And we come wailing around the corner, and I threw in a rudder and shot across the river and through this little shallow spot, cut off that corner. And he said, "Whoa, can you turn that light on now?" We paddled all night without the light. And the morning, he said, "I just can't believe that." And I said, "Well, can't you see in the dark?" He said, "No." But if you ever talk to him, or when you talk to him again, ask him about his eyesight in the dark.
All right, I'll have to do that. Yeah,
see what he says. Good.
Well, Butch, thanks so much for your time. This was a lot of fun, and I know a lot of people will enjoy listening.
Yeah, I get carried away. I don't get to talk canoeing a whole lot anymore. There's nobody around here, and so it's just fun to see young guys like you that are interested in this sport. You know, I was lucky enough to work with Delbert Case, and trying to think who he paddled with. I worked with the guy he paddled with too. They were both from Growing that won the first marathon. Oh, Chauncey Carr's dad, Alan Carr. And that was kind of funny because I worked with them in Grayling on a housing project right behind Burger King.
Okay.
The year I graduated from high school, and it was funny. They raced that race the year before I was born. Yeah. I got to work with those guys, and they were tough.
Sure.
Couple of tough guys. So anyway, that's just the way life is, but I'm glad that thing's still rolling. You know, people like Steve Southard and Lynn Whitty and me, and I took it over when we were down to where we weren't going to have a race, and everybody bugged me to do that. And luckily it came back, and it's a great event.
Oh, no doubt. Nope, it's a great sport, and yeah, hopefully for many years to come. So
as long as that river flows.
Yeah. Thanks again. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Hope to see you on the water.
Awesome. I would love that. Have a great night.
Okay. Thank you.
Take care. Okay.
Bye-bye.